All of you. Um, Welcome to the launch of Harvard Food Systems Initiative. The reason we're all here is about food. Food is the agenda, not just on the plate, but it's great to see students and faculty and scientists and members from community. Food for Free. Ben, welcome. Many of my peers from other institutions. As a year ago, when I brought the idea of building a common platform at Harvard for food systems, our leadership, faculty, colleagues, students, and staff shared their enthusiasm for us to take on this work here and now. I'm delighted that Dr. Walter Willett and I will be serving as the co-chairs, and I'd like to thank our Executive Vice President, Meredith Wienick, for her sponsorship and encouragement of the Harvard Food Systems Initiative. Meredith is unable to join us today, but sends her warm wishes to all of us. Students, faculty, colleagues, members of Greater Boston area, it is really a special moment to be here with you. Guests joining us virtually from North America, South America, Asia. There's actually a nutrition school in Asia that has said that they will be live casting this in their classroom tomorrow because it's, I think, 2:30 or 3:30 a.m. there. Middle East, Europe, it is great to have you all with us virtually. And my parents, Lakshmi and Hari, who are actually listening in from California, not too far, but still. To our students and colleagues and friends celebrating Rosh Hashanah, Shana Tova, to all our students, friends, and families celebrating Dashera, Happy Navaratri. Harvard Food Systems Initiative is our effort to build a common platform for our students, faculty, and staff to engage in and contribute to food systems. We have an enormous energy here on our campus with faculty teaching courses, leading scientific research, students engaging in curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular efforts in areas that intersect with food systems in old and new ways. I hope that the Harvard Food Systems Initiative will serve as a common place for knowledge exchange, community engagement, and convening. From Harvard Kennedy School, we have Jane Nelson with us today. Thank you for joining us. Lisa Dreyer, who met Dr. David earlier this afternoon. From Harvard Law School, we have Professor Kristen Stills joining us. We have Tracy Whitley, our Dean for Administration from the law school, and Samantha, who was a student at Princeton prior, my prior role, is now an L1 student. Really glad to meet you, and thank you for being here. I had to say that, Samantha. Business school, I'm a fan and alumna where agribusiness has been part of the educational program for over half a century. School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, where actually there is a class today called Science and Cooking, and they're right on the other side and right engaged in physics and cooking. And I don't know how they make it happen, but it's one of our most popular courses, right, Naveen? Naveen is already nodding. Harvard School of Public Health, where the best of teaching and research to advance health happens every day. Dr. Hugh is here. Dr. Willett is on his way. He will be here with us shortly. And to our amazing undergraduate students, graduate students, student athletes, doctoral scholars, we have the ecosystem here to bring sharper focus and take shared actions in the advancement of healthy and sustainable food systems that promotes health of the people and our planet. And a huge shout out to David and Heather and the team at Office for Sustainability, right? Great partners for us. I wish to commend our Food Literacy Project fellows. I don't know how many we have here. You should raise your hands because I want you to meet as many. So meet as many people in this room. These are our rock star students, right? They're the food systems fellows who are taking courses in chemistry to bioengineering, but think also about food systems and what it means to us in our communities. And they are a big reason why we have the initiative to begin with. Their voice and their foresight, might I add, will shape what Food Systems Initiative will be for our campus. It is my hope that the initiative becomes the heartbeat for food systems work and serves at our epicenter, at the epicenter for knowledge, community, and convening in our region and beyond. I am pleased that today's launch is part of the events leading up to President Joe Biden's White House conference on hunger, nutrition, and health. It is a conference scheduled on Wednesday, the 28th, and everybody is welcome to join. And Patty is here from Tufts, and Tufts is a big part of the conference as well. We want to hear from every audience, learn from and with you as we shape and serve through knowledge, engagement, and convening. I want us to leave hopeful and inspired to act in our communities so that we can build healthy diets from sustainable food systems for all communities here and globally. Students who are joining us in person and virtually, I want you to be at the forefront of the initiative. Inform us, educate us, stay in conversation with us, because you're a part of this initiative in helping shape and engage. Harvard Food Systems Initiative, many people ask me, what does it mean to me, Smitha? And the way I think of it is the initiative will bring you tools in the form of white papers, curated list of videos, scientific publications, interviews, recipes, menus, faculty lectures, distinguished speaker series, such as the one that we will have later today. All these tools and content will be made available to local, regional, and global community and will be open source so that a student from Kiev to Kuala Lumpur, from Kolkata to Cambridge can have access to these tools. For our students and our community members, in addition to the above, we will have in-person lectures by Harvard faculty, experiential learning opportunities like farm visits. If you haven't said hi to Farmer Ward, you have to say hi to him and embarrass him for me, please. Farmer talks, engaging with local fishing communities, nonprofit organizations that are involved in food recovery, farmers market that Gwen leads for us on our campus, cooking demos. Martin is here, Andrew is here, our culinary team, bug them if you want more recipes, teaching kitchens, kitchen tours, encountering new innovations and innovators, from artificial intelligence and what its impact on food industry will be, to cultured meat and longitudinal studies, so we understand what is the effect of cultured meat on human body. I don't think those answers are even on the table for discussion yet. Urban farming, fermentation, and emerging technologies. I am inspired by your presence, my peers from MIT, Boston University, Boston College, Tufts University, Professor Dan Rubenstein, if he said he will be joining from Princeton virtually, and beyond, and can't wait to bring sharper focus with shared actions with and for our youth. Let us begin the knowledge exchange, community engagement, and convening to solve for healthy diets and sustainable food systems in our communities, for better health, for better access, for better tools, and for inclusive programs. Today, I am joined by Dr. David Nabarro, Special Envoy of the United Nations World Health Organization, Director General on COVID-19, Advisor to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization on follow-up to the UN Food Systems Summit, which happened about a year ago, right here in New York, and leads the food work stream in the UN Global Crisis Response Group on food, energy, and finance. Dr. David Nabarro arrived here after completing his meetings at the United Nations General Assembly. Dr. Nabarro is the co-director for the Institute of Global Health Innovation and professor of global health at Imperial College London. He established the Geneva-based social enterprise Skills, Systems, and Synergy for Sustainable Development with Florence Lasbain in 2018. And Florence is with us here today. You should say hi to her as well. David secured his medical qualification in 1974 and has worked internationally in multiple clinical and public health roles in governments, NGOs, and universities. He held positions within the UN systems between 1999 and 2017, including Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Food Security and Nutrition, and Under Secretary General on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Climate Change. In 2018, David received the World Food Prize together with Lawrence Haddad, another great colleague and friend, for their leadership in building coalitions for action for better nutrition across sustainable development goals. Let us hear from Dr. Nabarro about the power of dialogues, building shared goals, and taking local action to create global change for food systems change. David.
Thank you so much. That was a really lovely introduction, but perhaps more importantly, how nice it was to hear so clearly about the Harvard Systems Initiative being launched today. What an honor for me to be together with my colleague and partner Florence sitting in the back, to be here on this occasion. And so, special thank you to Haneef, and your role as the managing director of dining here at Harvard University and co-chair of the initiative, together with Walter Willett coming shortly. And best wishes also through you to Meredith Wienick for her role in making this initiative happen, and to Frank Hugh for his role as chair of nutrition in being so important in it. I'd like to use this opportunity of being with you today to share with you some of the work that I've been doing on food systems. And I'm going to share with you things that I've not shared with anybody before. It's an effort to try to learn lessons from what we've been doing. And I'd like to share it with you, and I want to encourage you in this lecture to be thinking about what I say. And if you want to comment now, that would be great. But also, we've got opportunities later, and if you'd like to have an exchange with me, that would be great as well. I started by thinking to myself, what is it that I really want you to be reflecting on when this talk is finished? And so here's where I hope we can get to within the next 15 to 20 minutes. I'd like us to accept that we have been working with food in systems, and actually we've been doing it for some years. We may not have recognized that we do that, but from today on, I think it's really helpful if we see ourselves as food systems workers, even specialists, and imagine what that means for our professional lives. I think we're also interested in shifting the way in which food systems work. And we are often asking ourselves, how can I be a more effective systems shifter? And I'm going to suggest to you that to shift systems, we need to invest in building the social capital that exists among the people within those systems. And I want to also share with you some of my thoughts about how we can best do it. And that means I want to take you with me through the September 2021 Food Systems Summit that took place in New York last year, about a year ago. And I want to invite you to think through with me how we can build on what happened in the Food Systems Summit and perhaps encourage that kind of thinking and working on food and indeed on other complex challenges that face our world. And so I will take you into the current global crisis in food, energy, and finance systems that we were focusing on quite intensively last week in New York. And I'm going to ask you to continue to apply food systems thinking, even though in the world right now, there's big anxieties about whether there's going to be famines in a number of countries and food shortages in particular communities. And I want to convince you before I finish that we still need to see food as a systems issue, even though we are in the midst of these crises. And then finally, I want to leave you with some thoughts about the kind of skills that we all need to have to be effective systems workers, especially effective at trying to change food systems. So it's quite an agenda, no slides, and that's deliberate because I've learned over the years that if I try to show slides and tell a story with words at the same time, it can get a bit dull for you trying to work out, do I have to read the slide or listen to what he says? So no slides today, but as I say, I want to open the conversation, especially if I say things that trouble you. See, if we're going to work with food in systems, what does that really mean? I think it means recognizing that food connects to just about everything in people's lives. I think it means recognizing that food is an absolutely vital instrument for collaboration between people in their households, in their societies, and of course, in their economies, both at local level, at national level, and internationally. And when we are working with food in systems, we need to be used to one overarching reality. How many of you are farmers to help me with that? I know there's 1 or 2 or 3 farmers. Thank you. I want to put to you that a farmer views food in a completely different way from how somebody, a consumer going and buying food at the supermarket will view it. It's a completely different product. And the emotions around it, the experiences around it, the science around it are hugely different if you're producing food by rearing animals or by growing crops or by keeping fish, compared with how you view food if you're going to the supermarket to buy a portion for your dinner and wondering whether or not to buy this or that because of the sell-by date. And that, for me, is the key to working with food in systems, is starting with the recognition that everybody sees it differently and that we, all of us, need to be comfortable with that as a starting point, comfortable with the reality that in food, just about everybody has a different view of what they're up to when they're handling it, when they're considering it, when they're perhaps buying it, or when they're using it to feed their families. And that's why working with food is so difficult, because if everybody's got a different view of food systems, it means trying to pull people together so that they will look at things and consider different ways of doing them, using less of this or more of that, or perhaps different kind of cropping patterns or different kind of storage approaches. They will perhaps question a bit, and they will be quite hard to get everybody to agree. Now, in 2015, the world came together, leaders came together and agreed on a number of goals for the future. They were called Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 of them, and they set out the future that all nations have decided is desirable for people and for the planet. It's quite a thoughtful analysis. The document is called The World We Want. It was agreed universally by all world leaders after an intense consultation, and it became the plan for future development of our world between 2015 and 2030. And once that declaration was produced in September 2015, when I was working for the Secretary General of the United Nations, he said, okay, now let's bring together experts from universities, from farming communities, from companies, from governments, and from professional groups, and also from women's and youth and indigenous people's organizations. Let's just ask the question, what does this new agreement for the sustainable development future of our world mean for those who produce food and indeed for those who work in food systems? Well, the most important thing that happened as a result of that exercise of something called the Milano Group coming together was that everybody agreed that food as an issue needs to change if the world is going to succeed in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Quite simply, unless food is good for people's nutrition and health, we're going to have astronomical healthcare costs in the majority of nations that are just going to build up and up and up in coming years. Unless the way in which food is produced changes, there's going to be continued destruction of natural habitats, and this will have adverse effects on the environment. Unless food production systems change, it's going to be very hard indeed for rural areas to be able to retain and provide decent living for the large numbers of people who depend on rural life for their incomes. All together, food has to change for the environment, for climate, for people's wealth and well-being, for people's nutrition. Otherwise, we will not, as a world, reach the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, there's been a lot of good science that's actually made this point. The achievement of a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for everybody requires shifts in food systems. And it can't just be done by saying we need to have new global rules, because food systems are hugely variable and are extremely local. So therefore, if food systems are going to change, it's got to be done in ways that take account of local needs, of justice, and of the roles of different local actors in food systems. And so it has to be very delicately undertaken indeed. In summary, food systems have got to change because that's needed for the future of our world. And yet, because food systems are incredibly varied and locally specific and involve hundreds of millions of people, the process of shifting food systems can't just be done by government leaders giving out edicts on how things should be changed. In fact, it has to be as a result of negotiation with great care to think through the priorities to be given to farmer well-being, to people's nutrition, people's health, the nature and the natural habitats that we have in our communities, climate, the position of women, the position of young people, and more. So is there really any point in going ahead and trying to bring about changes in food systems if everybody's got a different view about what a food system is, and if every food system has very different characteristics depending on where it is, who's involved, what's being produced, and more? I think it's not only necessary, it's absolutely essential. And so, together with colleagues, I've been thinking, how do you bring about change when you've got an issue on which everybody's got very different points of view? You've got an issue which has extremely local characteristics. How on earth can you make change happen? It's not a simple thing where you say switch from using one fuel to another, or switch from using one means of energy creation to another. We're talking here about working with very large numbers of people. And here is my own point of view on this. Give up on bringing people together into a room and presenting them with lots of scientific information and graphs and PowerPoints and other means of persuading them to change. Give up on trying to persuade people to change by offering them incentives, whether they are cash or otherwise, because it will always go wrong, especially if the cash ends up perhaps moving people in directions that subsequently won't be appreciated. Instead, work on the relationships between people, work on their shared values, and work on trying to build trust between them so that when change is being attempted, you're not trying to force people into different ways of working and thinking that they find unacceptable. Instead, you are working with them and taking account of their concerns, especially if they're being asked to change the way in which they produce things, the way in which they treat things once they've produced them, or the way in which they consume them when they've cooked them. Nurture change through building what I call social capital, rather than through trying to brainwash people into new ways of being and working. Now that means rather a different way of going about efforts to bring about change. For example, instead of concentrating when you're working for change on meeting with the people with whom you agree and bringing them into a room and trying to build them up and saying, you're my change agents because you see things the same as me, go out and persuade everybody else that we're right and they're wrong. The difficulty with that approach to change, where you're trying to create new norms and standards and work with those norms and standards as the basis for the change, is that you create a community of people who will be resistant. I mean, just think of what we've been through with vaccines against COVID-19. There is a community of people who really do not believe in vaccination, do not want to be vaccinated, and will fight against it until they really go through quite a lot of inconvenience. Even though I'm a great believer in vaccines, do not at the same time think it's appropriate to demonize a community of people who don't want to be vaccinated. Because in the end, I'm not going to get them to shift. I might even push them harder into their position of antagonism if I try to persuade them and persuade them and persuade them. And so it's the same when it comes to food. Rather than focusing just on meeting with people with whom I agree. If I'm, for example, wanting to eat plant-based protein, sitting with others who agree with me on that, and building up a strong cohort of change agents who think like me, I'm taking a different point of view. I want to bring into my space people with whom I disagree, people who really don't want to see things in the same way as I do at all. I want to collaborate with the enemy rather than just sit with the like-minded people who I get on with. I want diversity. Because in the end, when we're trying to change how systems work, especially when different people have different views of these systems, it's better to engage everybody and to, in fact, engage inclusively, bringing those with whom we don't agree into the discussion and in finding ways to explore options together with them, even though we have different perspectives. Now, in countries where you've got big differences between political factions and everything feels as though it's highly politicized, it can be very difficult to work with your polar opposites and to engage with them and to collaborate with them. But we concluded in our work on food, and indeed on other big development challenges, that the only way to move ahead is to actually value diversity, to bring in people with whom we disagree, to explore options together, to identify promising game-changing opportunities with them, and then to travel with them to find new and different ways of working. So we tried this in the Food Systems Summit 2021. It wasn't universally successful. 400 non-governmental organizations did not like us creating this very open platform for working together, and indeed said, no, we're going to boycott. We're going to boycott because you're not starting from human rights principles. And by welcoming in business and letting others come in and be part of these discussions, you are creating what we consider, this is NGOs talking, to be an unacceptable starting point. So they refused at the beginning. They did start to come in over time, but it took time. Also, by saying, we will say that anybody should be able to participate in the preparing for this summit, we also had to say, but it is up to the people within individual countries to decide who they're going to engage and how they're going to do it. And that meant handing over control to national governments so that they prepared for the summit in their way, rather than in the way that we determined was right. In summary, we asked for participation. It was right in the middle of COVID. 148 countries said, yes, we want to be part of this summit. They brought 110,000 people into dialogues all over the world on the future of their food systems. Not only did they work in successions of dialogues about the future of food systems that were incredibly wide and diverse, but they went ahead from doing the dialogues, and 110 of them created long-term strategic plans for the future of their food systems that were not only prepared and published on the internet before the summit, but the governments and their people, these many thousands of people who are working on dialogues, continued to work for food systems transformation in the weeks and months after the summit, and they're still keeping going now. So this open, inclusive kind of dialogue where you actually explicitly reach out to involve people you don't get on with has had a long-term influence on the willingness of people to work together at country level on the future of food systems that has been surprising, quite unexpected, and has been associated with an enormous unleashing of energy, the kind of which has not been seen before. And that unleashing of energy has stayed strong, even though we're right in the midst of a global food, energy and finance crisis that's affecting somewhere around 1.5 billion people all over our world. And they are still focusing on the reform of food systems after the summit. And they are doing that work whilst at the same time trying to think how best to protect farmers as a result of this crisis, how best to protect poor people as a result of this crisis, and how to avoid famine and starvation. So the energy that we had in the Food Systems Summit is still strong enough to carry governments and civil society, farmers and other groups forward, despite the difficulties that we're having right now because of the crisis. Finally, just in case this is all leading you to question whether or not there really is some substance to this, I want to share with you that yes, groups all over the world have looked at this dialogue approach to dealing with complex and messy issues. And they're saying, what can we learn from this for other difficult challenges that are being faced? So, for example, in advance of an education summit that took place in New York a week ago today, again, dialogues were applied in order that various different stakeholders could think through what kind of future education system they would like for their people. And you've already heard from Smitha that in advance of this summit being organized by President Biden in the White House later this week, dialogues have been put in place. Perhaps it's not been quite as many as would have been hoped, but that will come. And perhaps most importantly, as I talk with government people all over the world about how they want to deal with other massively difficult development challenges, they're telling me, 1, we want to do dialogues. 2, we want to learn the skills of systems leadership that you have used as the basis for the food systems dialogues work. And 3, we would like that systems leadership training to be integrated into our university education programs. And that brings me to why I wanted with Florence to come here and be with you today. This is a brilliant university. It's a university with so many different schools and departments that have the quality of research that is needed to really transform our world. Do the different professional schools connect together sideways in dealing with issues in an interdisciplinary way? I expect they do. But then when I hear about the Harvard Food Systems Initiative, I'm super excited because by being run out of the dining services, your initiative can bring together those who supply the food for the different people, the family in the Harvard ecosystem, together with those who prepare food, together with all of you who consume food, together with all of you who are involved in nutrition or in agriculture or our international development. You can also bring Tufts in, you can bring other different parts of the educational infrastructure in this city, and it creates an opportunity for energy to be unleashed by different groups of people being involved that otherwise would not happen. And so I'd like to encourage you as you advance the Harvard Food Systems Initiative, not to hold back, to just imagine that actually you could be providing the basis of the new thinking and working that's necessary for food systems transformation. I'd like to be able to come back and find out how you get on, because this is the kind of initiative that I think is key to having a future of food systems that contributes to the world we want: sustainable, equitable, resilient, and nutritious. Thanks for the chance to share my words. Look forward to following up with you in questions and in the dialogues. Thank you.
there any questions?
or comments?
Hi, back here.
Hello.
My name is Malte. I'm a primary care physician from Germany and a student in biomedical informatics here at the Harvard Medical School.
Yeah.
And yeah, I want to do you the favor of disagreeing. I hope not to become your enemy by that. No, I really liked your comment that, or your point that kind of we need to go beyond brainwashing people with evidence or manipulating them by setting incentives, but kind of really negotiating with them. But then as you being from the UN, I mean, your mission probably is not to kind of do all these conversations yourself. There has to be some change in policy of how governments, be it the UN or on a national level, work to facilitate this. So kind of what kind of policy shift would that be? And the second question is, I think what you're aiming at for is a kind of a change of culture. But how can you ensure that that really is sustainable? Because I can imagine people going home from a summit being thrilled, having all these personal contacts and bonds. But then after a year or two, that kind of, how do you say, diminishes by people changing positions, jobs. So I'm not quite convinced that that by itself is the solution forward.
Thanks very much indeed. What's your first name?
Sorry, Malte, M-A-L-T-E, like the island of Malta with an E.
Malta. Thank you very much indeed. Smitha, can I just react to each comment while they come in? Or because in real life, none of us can continue, particularly a tough piece of work when we're feeling up against really bad political forces or people who just don't want to give us the space to move. And it can get lonely and it can get really, really difficult. And so there has to be some capacity for solidarity between those of us who are working to deal with very difficult situations. The word that I use for that solidarity is accompanying each other. I think that particularly when we're working in something that's political, when we are encountering resistance, the most important thing we need is to have in our phones a contact of somebody we can text when things are tough and perhaps be able to have a conversation with them and be supported through the difficult periods. And so one of the other features that I've wanted to put in place, particularly following the Food Systems Summit, is the ability of our people in the United Nations, but also in universities and other institutions, instead of seeing themselves as producers of truth who get satisfaction and perhaps reward through writing papers or issuing instructions. Instead, I've asked them to see themselves as mentors or accompanists of people as they're going through complex and difficult processes. Now, it's not easy, Malta, to make a shift in how institutions work. But for example, I'm working with the German government right now with people in BMZ, the ministry responsible for international cooperation. I was meeting a deputy minister who is in charge, Barbel Valka, I'd forgotten her surname, just last week. And she said to me, the future is going to require all of us supporting each other as we make the tough choices that will have to be decided on in order, for example, for food to be sustainable and to be made available to everybody at a price they can afford. But she said to get there, we will have to accompany each other through the difficult stages. So all I'm saying is, yes, I appreciate that there will be times when governments appear to be not listening and not willing to participate, not willing to change. All I think is necessary is that those of us who are trying to bring about change, support each other through those tough times, and accompany each other. If we don't do it that way, then we're not going to be able to make the changes. Just think about it a bit, if you like, and just imagine that you're involved in some tough stuff, and ask yourself, what kind of accompanying would be helpful to you? We could talk about it some more, but that's just something I wanted to add to what I said before about how we're going to have to get through this accompanying and support, because it is going to be difficult. Yeah. More here? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm a student at Harvard, and also I work for the Los Angeles Food Policy Council. And we talk a lot about social capital at the local level.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, how do you nurture social capital at the global level to impact change in the food ecosystems?
My anxiety, Chris, is that the global actors perhaps don't appreciate the power of social capital at the local level adequately, and perhaps don't give it enough attention. I mean, here's an example. We're right in the midst of an accelerating climate crisis. Every single person in this room will have been affected, some of you quite badly, by the very extreme temperatures that we've seen, not so much in North America, but in India and Pakistan, the droughts in East Africa, the shortages of water in Central America. And surely many of you will be thinking, how am I going to get through the next 10 years if it's just going to be year on year of more and more difficulty? How am I going to cope with the suffering? How am I going to cope with my own grief that for my children, if you've got children, I can't actually guarantee them a life of the quality that I've had because of climate change. And I've been thinking very hard, what do we offer each other, and what do we offer others in a situation of increasing distress and sadness and perhaps guilt? Answer, we have to invest more and more in the social capital around ourselves, around our families, around our homes, in our neighborhoods. And we have to be on the lookout for people who are feeling that they just can't get on because they are stressed. And often we find that young people are actually getting super depressed as they do their studies. They're in their, say, age of 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. They're just finding it difficult to go ahead. And they would be the quickest and the first to say, we must invest in the capacity to build connections that enable us to support each other in and around our homes, to support those who have less in the way of assets. Because without that, our societies will just continue to atomize and fall apart. And we've seen some of that happen through COVID, because a lot of the structures on which poorer people particularly have depended in societies all over the world have become fragmented as a result of the impact of COVID on our interactions and social systems. So the need for prioritizing social capital is not, by the way, a political thing. It's not Democrat, you want social capital, Republican, you don't care about it. It's actually a cross-party issue, because without investing in social capital, you cannot protect people for the future, particularly kids. Yet the problem, as you've just, I think, implied, is that quite a lot of leaders have not found a way to turn that need for social capital into policy prescriptions that can be applied at the local government level, at the national government level, in ways that can be communicated to voters and to ministries of finance and so on. So it's a huge problem, and it's something that I am actually struggling with on an almost constant basis, particularly because I think that to help societies deal with existential crisis, investment in social capital is absolutely key, and it's not a political choice. It's a vital thing for everybody. be interested to find that. Do you agree with that? And would you say that this is one of the challenges we will have to deal with, or have I not convinced you?
I'm there with you. I'm there with you. I can see your viewpoint, and
Yeah,
as you mentioned earlier on, so many viewpoints, right, in
that's
this
right.
food ecosystem. So
Yeah.
I think policy tends to, if it starts from quote unquote the top, it might
Yeah.
take a while to really impact communities. But
That's why we need to let it come from where it really matters. That's why it's great to hear that you're in this policy council. I bet you're able to feed some interesting stuff in. It's a very great thing to do, to be able to combine your own studying with also participating in these kinds of processes in the governance of the university. Cool. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question
Thank you.
from one of our undergrads, Michael.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love this idea of social capital, something I think about a lot, especially, in the climate movement. I think
Yeah.
the relationships are so key to prevent the burnout, because for a long time, up until we finally got the IRA passed, it was just a lot of dead ends.
Yeah.
And so I think, my question is, in this movement of a food systems transformation is, let's say we build up a lot of social capital
Mhm.
within the Harvard student body, the UN, with different countries. Then what? What would that look like for you? What are the next steps once we build adequate social capital?
So the key is dialogue. In our language, we see governance as dependent on there being open dialogue that lets all points of view be expressed. The difficulty is that in the management of that dialogue, sometimes we end up compartmentalizing people, and that may lead to certain interests getting more airtime in the discussion because they're perhaps more popular, and others being squeezed out. So the kind of dialogue that we propose actually is designed to give space for all interests at least to be heard, and then over time, the process of consolidating and trying to identify which are the priority interests. In our experience, the process of letting different people be heard is key to the development of the kind of social capital that we want, because those who feel excluded are the ones who will then fight against change. We never prescribe precisely what format multi-stakeholder dialogue should take. Obviously, in places where you've got very strong political systems and representational governance, then it might fit into the representational process that exists in the community. In other places, it might be much more open, and you are creating space and inviting the engagement of people on their choice. But our simple request is, once you've moved to a point where you are going to encourage social capital, once you've opened up the possibility of dialogue, you just let the conversations happen. And we are quite naive, I think, when we go on from that, and we say, if you let go and let the conversations happen, in most societies that we've worked with, and we've done it, as I say, in 148 countries, the conversations evolve in ways that give space to everybody without there having to being major disagreements, violence, and so on. I've only had one dialogue session out of the 1,600 that I know that broke up because people just refused to sit down together and insisted on walking out the room. Anyway, that's just talk to you more about it afterwards, but let it go and see what happens is our line.
David, thank you so much for the engagement, right, with our community. Thank you for your service to humanity during the past 20, 30 months now since COVID has started.
Yeah.
Every week or 2 weeks, David had hosted what is called open briefings that I would listen in to inform myself during the pandemic to prepare our teams. Thank you for the gift of your time and for sharing your wisdom and experiences. for your presence with our students and our community in Cambridge. Let us, all of us, take collective action, make each of our organizations epicenters for change and experiments, like Stefan Thornke and Linda Hill from HBS would say, harness our collective genius. Right? As Walter and I work at this epicenter, our living learning environment, we will take an integrated strategy, an interdisciplinary approach, and we will continue to work ahead with you, for our community. Several of my team members are here, Martin, Kyle, Krista, Vicky, Ed, right? We're in the messy middle with you. Not that every solution is going to be perfect, but we are committed to being in service around food systems in our community. And thank you for being here. Let the conversations
Yeah.
continue.
Thank you very much indeed, Smitha. Thank you all. Right. Bye-bye, Chris.